Hello and welcome to the Heads and Volleys podcast with me, Lee Dunn. This episode is an interview with Barry McCabe. He is a strength and conditioning coach and has done a bunch of work with the players and teams that I work with. He came to the game as a former professional and has followed along the pathway of sports science, and because of that, he has a really interesting view of how to engage your players and ultimately really how I see the disservice that we offer our players when we are working in environments as a coach and we know how to move the X's and the O's, but we don't necessarily know how to engage the player to move as the X or the O, and how we can develop them and understand that we have a group of 12 to 15 players, and those 12 to 15 players are not all the same. They're not all of the same maturation. They're not all the same in development. So this conversation really highlights the differences in players, how you can bring in these measurements to your own environment, and the simple understanding of what that means. And so you begin to consider workloads, or at least what you're demanding of your players based on their physical age, and not just their birthday in comparison to everybody else, but their actual physical development level. So it's a really interesting conversation with Barry, and I hope you enjoy it. And before I get into that, just a quick thank you again, as always, to Tactical Pad for their sponsorship. Their animated gifts for my players continue to deliver. They continue to help me articulate what I'm looking to deliver to my players, and for them to understand it before they even get to practice. And then even in a game last weekend, I pulled one up and said, do you remember this moment from practice? This is a moment that we just scored a goal from. This is what we want to continue to work on. So again, thank you to Tactical Pad, and here we go with Barry McCabe.
My name is Barry McCabe, and I am originally from Ireland, living in San Francisco currently. I think I'll work backwards. I've been coaching as an athletic development coach and soccer coach here in the Bay Area for the last few years. And the athletic development work has been soccer specific. It's been working with youth soccer players primarily. And before that, education-wise, got through an undergrad and master's degree in exercise science and human performance, which got me a lot of experience working with athletes of all different sports, I suppose, and different levels, and got me a chance to do a lot of research, lab-based research, field-based research, and understanding where we get our information today from, and a lot of this through research. So that was exciting to be involved in that. And I played full-time in Ireland for about 5 years, which was another great experience, because I mean, that's all growing up in Ireland, is all you wanted to do was to become some sort of athlete or some sort of sports star. And that was my whole identity as a kid, was playing sports, and primarily soccer. And it got me to age 17 when I signed my first contract and joined a team in Dublin in Ireland, but the setup was such that I got to study part-time as well, which is a pretty unique setup for a full-time player, and getting to study part-time, which my parents loved because I had that degree to back up on, because that's always the challenge with, you got to commit to being a pro at age 15 and 16, and you throw away your education, but I was never at the level of making it over to England at that young age, so this is a good route for me, and actually ended up getting more and more interest into sports science and coaching, that actually probably took away a little bit of my love and energy for playing football full time, because it's not for everyone. And people don't understand that. It's like playing full time is fatiguing and tough, and that's kind of created my identity currently, is having that playing experience, but also really having probably a bigger love now for coaching and athletic development and working with kids and teams.
I think it's very typical to hear of many players, especially from Europe and the UK, that follow the pathway of wanting to become a pro, and I've got plenty of friends that did that and didn't make it, and then get to 17, 18 years old with very little education because everything went into becoming a pro. And now here you are, kind of moving and meandering away from that to now recognizing that actually it served me really well, as the saying goes, stay in school, right?
Yeah, I was frustrated as hell with my parents when I was 15, 16. There was clubs interested in taking me over on trial, and I don't think that was an option because of the values they held, and I'm thankful now that was the case, because I'm really grateful for the route that I got to take in the end.
So your master's in performance enhancement and injury prevention, so that was kind of came from your part study as well as playing. I guess one of my first questions would be, are there a lot of myths that people hold in terms of what you need to do as a player, or kind of the typical like sprinting idea? And we'll kind of move into that shortly, but you kind of talk about research and the answers in the numbers typically, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what's one of the strong points I have, is having that education background, is understanding where we get our current information from, just purely in the sports science world, is we get it from people testing ideas and people testing theories and testing different training strategies in labs and gyms and on the field, and analysing if that is actually effective or not. But I think probably currently at all levels of sport, there's all these kind of myths, I suppose, training myths or cultural myths that people think are effective in improving their sport or improving their athleticism, but they probably just come from historical efforts or traditional efforts of how to improve certain aspects of your athleticism or your sport of choice. But so there was a lot of myth busting going on there, which was nice, and working under some pretty impressive researchers and professors was, they were showing us the way and how to be objective in your view and how to be objective in understanding what works and what doesn't work. But at the same time, I think being involved with sport, the beauty is the subjectivity to it, is your attraction to it, is your view on it, and how you view the game or view the sport is how you'll probably influence the people you work with. So I think there's a bit of a balance between the being the objective research and evidence based, but also being subjective on how you see things as well yourself.
I guess there's different playing styles too, and things and tasks that you ask of your players too. You look at the press with Klopp and the intensity that he requires of his players, and even the Bielsa with Leeds too, and the kind of constant Leeds will tire towards the end of the season because they can't press that much that long. Yeah. Actually, they did a pretty good job of it and fell short, but there is so much about that subjective belief of how you should play. And I know when I've worked with teams and you say that, like, just hang back, just hold, let them have the ball, just as a different way of playing. But the typical soccer parent will see that their kid is not running and they lose their mind. Yeah. Why aren't you running? Chase the ball, press. Yeah. It's really cool to break down those myths and understand the physiology side. And I even going as far as, the My Coach for Adidas that you get in your shoe, the chip. Yeah. I remember getting one of those. Yeah. And when I finished my first game, I get the stats and I look at it. I think, man, I ran like 5 or 6 miles, whatever it was. Man, I maxed the speed of whatever miles per hour. And then I sent it to my dad, and my dad said, well, yeah, but look how much walking you did. And that, to me, was a real kind of moment of saying, oh, yeah, you don't run the entire time. Yet that's what you're led to believe by many, what you would kind of say, old school coaches. That's what, you have to run. You have to show effort, but there's no real proof of what that is.
Yeah, I think with the increased availability of things like that and our GPSs and, they're at the consumer level now where everyone has access to the information if they want it. But that's probably driving different interpretations of what success looks like in soccer or within whatever sport they're playing. It's like, I ran the 10K and I got to my pro level sprint distance, and that's driving on their training, but it's not. I challenge that it's not developed them as soccer players, and yeah, that's a big challenge I think in modern coaches, with the amount of access that kids have to information and how that's affecting how they view the game and viewing what's important. And your challenge as a coach is to re-guide them to what is important, and it's really difficult. It's really tough.
We talk about kind of the almost professionalizing of youth soccer, in that most coaches are compensated, many do it full time, and kind of what that looks like in terms of kind of this engagement with their players and what they're asking of the players. And many, I believe, will not allow or are often dissatisfied with players that are multi-sport athletes. That can often be a conflict where I'm a professional coach, so I think you should be a professional player too, and kind of importing that view on those players so much. kind of where do you stand on things like multi-sports or things like training loads, which I know we'll get into, but especially kind of those cross-sport athletes?
For me, a multi-sports approach growing up to a certain age, and I think that depends on the individual, is so important. And we have this identity here in the States that we're professionalizing youth soccer earlier and earlier, and asking kids and their families to commit at younger and younger. It seems like a younger year every single year.
Yeah.
Kids are coming in a year younger, and having expectations with 2 and 3 practices a week at age 8. Where's the time for the kids to be kids? And where's the chance for them to play other sports, or figure out what else they want to do, and just not have soccer as their complete identity? And I also think that we also now live obviously in a society where kids are not outside, and especially in the States, they're not outside playing until it gets dark, and then they have to go home. So we've got to even bear that more in mind. So what comes first? Is it more important to be a well-rounded mover, like human movement, good motor skills, or is it more important to be a really good soccer player?
Right.
But I don't think you can be a really good soccer player without the movement skills and the motor skills that are necessary to play whatever sport you want to play. But in soccer, in this case soccer, you can't have that. You can't be a top soccer player without having that big, wide, rounded motor skill. And the only way you acquire these motor skills is through variety when you're a kid. And multi-sports is training variety.
Mm-hmm.
And more advanced than that, a multi-sports approach within youth development has been shown to just create more robust athletes, and that means that they can handle the rigors of the demand. And as the demand increases when they get older and they get to those high school ages, they've built up a big wide base that they're safe enough now to specialize at age 16 and spend 2 or 3 years trying to specialize. And some would argue that that's too late, but other people would argue that that's not too late. And some of the European academies have set hours based on the age of their players and how much other sports that they actually have to do. And other sports is not going to the gym and lifting, it's actually going to do gymnastics, or going to do ballet or dance or basketball or racket sports. And that's a big identity. A lot of academies actually in England and in Germany as well. They're just the 2 countries that I'm most familiar with. So I'm a big advocate of it, and I think the conversations are always tough with parents, and what the parents ask what the kid should be doing, and they've got all these injuries cropping up. It's like, well, they should probably play more sports.
Right.
They should probably try different sports.
Diversify, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know from even holding a team meeting last week where I meet my new players, and I like to do the little kind of quiz with them before they come in, and just give me a little bit about who you are. What do you do? What do you do outside of school? What school do you go to? Things like that. And do you play other sports? And it's scary that every single one said, soccer is my main sport and I like other sports. And it felt like, unfortunately, they may have felt pressure to feel like soccer is their only sport. They don't want to let the team down or the coach down, or they feel like they're being judged. Yeah. When actually, I really want you to play just like that. I want you to play other sports, and I want you to be honest about it. And maybe we can talk a little bit about kind of the periodization, and in terms, and we're both going through the federation licenses now, but in terms of even workloads for players that are playing other sports and coming into your practice, having been to track, and things like communication between coaches. Because and I've experienced where I've had a super athletic player come to practice who is unusually tired. And the experience I've had growing up was, if you're tired, you need to push harder because you're not working hard. You need to push through it. Yeah. When actually he's exhausted because his track coach has probably made him run however many miles or jump however many hurdles. So I need to be conscious of that. And when my players are saying, oh, we don't do anything else, but you do other things, you're just not telling me. And so now it's a vicious cycle, I feel, where this kid is just getting challenged and challenged in unfair ways and unachievable goals for that kid.
Yeah, and especially if we're not in a setup where, say we're in an academy setup where they're with you 10 months of the year, at least with that you could maybe within your environment make sure that the team as a whole do other sports. But we deal with kids coming from all these different schools and different programs and track and basketball. it's tough to, can't keep up with it. I don't have the answer to that. I don't know if anyone has the answer to that at, say, age 11. If you're dealing with 11-year-olds or 12-year-olds, I don't know if anyone has the answer to how to manage that, rather other than just saying, okay, just take practice off or do 2 practices a week. But then because we've also professionalized youth sports, you've got other people, parents, other players being challenged that this kid is only coming twice a week, and he's still playing he or she is still playing at the weekends, and I think it is a vicious cycle. That's probably the best way to describe it. But I think also in the States, soccer is seasonal, and I think if we were more honest with that, maybe at the kind of, not the ultra competitive academy level, but at the competitive level, like we have here in San Francisco, I think if we stuck to the fact that soccer is seasonal, we could use the other parts, the winter and the summer seasons, to promote our kids to go play other sports.
I get asked questions now about what soccer summer camp should we go to.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, sure, go to a soccer camp. Our club runs it. Other clubs run soccer camps. Soccer camps are everywhere. But when you go and do an outdoor adventure camp or a swim camp or something else, go and try something else.
Yeah.
At least, even if you like something, go and give it a go.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you have to do soccer.
Yeah, I've heard groups of kids come from teams being organised by parents who are, I think, maybe seeing this as an issue like we're talking about now, is actually organising that the team go do an outdoor camp or some other sport camp together, because they're still doing it as a team, and maybe that ticks one of the boxes, because some kids think I can't go do basketball because my teammates are not doing it. Well, maybe if we go do it as an entire team and play a 6-week basketball season in the winter.
That's a great idea.
I think that's came from some parents, and I think that's something that we should be able to create more space for. Is within our year-long plans, we've got our fall season, and here's the commitment, and if you're doing other sports, that's fine, but let's just have the conversation about it and figure out what makes sense for the kid, and make sure he or she is not exhausted, leading to burnout and taking away the kid's intrinsic love for actually showing up for training and games. But maybe as a team we go do something different for 6 or 8 weeks in the winter, and it's part of the plan, and it's set out from the start, and maybe you get parents to drive it. I don't know. I think there's been some good success stories. The idea of having kids here, they believe soccer is 3 days a week game. They don't see it as a recreational or a social tool that I used growing up, and you probably used growing up, is like meeting people outside of your team and using the sport to unite, I suppose. I don't think that exists here, or doesn't exist enough. Not in our environment.
No, I agree with you. It's super structured. So I want to kind of touch on something that you've done with my team, is like maturation and building and developing athletic profiles for our players, and really just understanding where they're at physically. Kind of touch on that, what you did with my team, and what the idea of it is, what the long-term goal for that is.
With the maturation testing is basically monitoring and kind of assessing players based on their maturation age rather than their physical age. So you get your 12-year-olds, one is 6 foot and one is 4 foot, and how do we know that because we can see the difference, but how do we use that information to maybe manipulate each of those kids' individual development plan? If the 6 foot kid has just gone through a pretty strenuous growth spurt, I don't know if that 6 foot kid can handle the same demands or as the younger, hasn't hit puberty kid, and that's why we do this maturation testing, is to give the information to the coach, just to equip coaches with more information. And it's all estimations because we don't have access to like the gold standard of testing of doing DEXAs and X-rays that they would do in top academies in Europe. They'll really know exactly when you're going to hit your growth spurt and how we can adjust our training load so we don't pick up injuries like our really common one here is our patella tendonitis, or our shin splints or ischial flatus, and a lot of that is from growth spurts and overuse during growth spurts. So the maturation testing is equipping the coaches with an idea that maybe most of their group, or maybe some of their group, is about to go through a pretty significant growth spurt, or they're about to hit their growth spurt, or they're about to go through puberty, and it's just more information for coaches. On a broader sense, on an international sense and a national sense, but even with the US Soccer Federation, they've used this information to create bio-banded tournaments. So this was, I don't know if it was started in England, but it's been in the Premier League academies for years, where they gather teams for tournaments, and they create the teams based on their maturation age rather than their chronological year of birth age. So you could technically have a U14 girl playing up with the U17s, and technically maybe you could have a U16 girl playing down with the U15s. And the reason for this is to try create better experiences for the individual. So that smaller player playing with bigger players, you got to think what's his or her experience like? Are they actually enjoying being pushed around, or are they having to really develop their technical skills to shine? And then vice versa, is the really mature physical player relying on his or her physical skills to be successful within the game? And does that take away from their technical understanding, their tactical understanding? Can they get away with it? Because soccer can be physical. So that would be using that information to group players based on their physical growth spurts and their maturation. And I think the results of these tournaments they've been doing in the US for the last 2 years is that players have had better experiences, and the games have been, in a broad sense, more technically demanding.
Sure, yeah, makes sense.
And that would be like a basic description of it. There's more, they have done research and there is results out in this, and I think they're still figuring out how to do this in a broader sense, but there is now rules within the development academy in US soccer that players can play up and down. So, and I think it's been more and more common now that players are playing up and down, because we're responsible for individual player development as we professionalize youth sports, right?
Sure.
So this information is maybe to think in a more individual sense, as how, the 4-foot 17-year-old, what's his or her experience. That was a bad example because we wouldn't have a 4-foot 17-year-old.
It's always possible.
Yeah.
But I get it, and I just think, unfortunately, the initial response to a player playing down is the typical coach that goes to a camp, goes to a tournament and has, the sandbaggers, right? They bring in this guy, oh yeah, he's not very good, and then suddenly they're winning tournaments, and unfortunately that tends to be the pushback.
Yeah.
The only pushback I've ever heard about things like this has been this kind of logistical playing with the rules to manipulate so you can win, or so a coach may win, and there's never an argument against it for the benefit of the player. Like, it's not good for the player. No one's ever said that.
No one's ever said. Yeah, that's true. But coaches would argue that, oh, you're playing one of your older players. But that's why. So these results in US soccer have shared strategies on how to do this, and anyone could do it. It doesn't take a background in exercise science or strength and conditioning or whatever to understand it. It's pretty straightforward, and we would use that information that the information would be shared amongst the development academy teams. I would assume, I don't know the ins and outs of it, so to prove that this kid actually is in this maturation group, and he's not just being brought down, he or she's not being brought down. So I think this information is to prevent those arguments.
I'd like to think the development academy is a little more, I guess we would say, serious and more about recognizing the individuals and their pathway, and not so much the coach. Because I spoke to a DA coach recently who just said, my kids haven't really played for anything for the last 6 months. They haven't really competed to win a division or a tournament or anything like that. So there's no real need for him to have a better, a sandbagger, so to say. The whole structure is more about that individual pathway.
Yeah.
So how I've seen it before, where you line all the players up on the field and kind of split the group in half, but you line them up by height. Is that? That's a simple way of doing it. It's not nailed on. I understand that, but seeing where you have 30 players and you split the group in half based on height. Yeah,
I think that'd be more. I think that within your training session you could do that, but how do you just do that in isolation? How do you do that just once and not do it every session? Or
right.
How does that fit into your plan and your philosophy and your individual player plan? I don't really know how to answer that. I don't know how to.
No, that's fair, and I think that's probably come from, and I've witnessed this, and then maybe that's just come from somebody that is aware of it and is trying to implement it within a practice, but maybe doesn't have access or has not gone through things like measuring the maturation of the players. But that's people trying.
Yeah, I think also we talk about the measurement of maturation. I don't know outside of the DA is there even in Northern California NPL. I don't think you're allowed to play down at all.
No, there's no playing down.
So I don't know if that ever will be the case, because I think then, because we're going away from the DA, maybe they're scared that it would be abused a little bit.
Sure.
Because then there's more of an emphasis on winning. You got your state cups and your leagues and your promotion or relegation, which I don't argue with. I think it's great, but
I think there's a lot of value in it, even for me, just receiving the feedback results and seeing and almost reaffirming what you see anyway.
Yeah.
And I see players that I think sometimes are a little slower, or they just generally undeveloped in comparison.
Yeah.
And then when you see the results, you think, oh, of course.
Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, it's just and the goal is more information for the coach. We're trusting coaches to be, the player development from an individual's side, and we're trying to just give more information to coaches. If it just reaffirms your subjective beliefs, which were probably right at the start, that just gives you an objective backup, I suppose. If you need to have conversations, or you feel like now you need to move the player up or down,
sure,
you've got, okay, well, here's the information or the data is we've proven is like actually he or she is in this grouping physically, so let's try it for a few games and let's see what players' experience is like. I think with that said, people tend to forget. We ask the question how players will do playing up or down physically and technically and tactically, but we forget socially that some players might not fit to go play down, and some players might not be able to go express themselves playing up because they're not used to being in an older environment or being with older players. So I think there's more to it than just the physical and the technical side. There's the social side as well, which is tough. But again, the information is just for coaches to try and make more informed decisions and more reasoning behind their decisions, I think.
You think about even just looking at a player, and instead of shouting at them or demanding more, or the typical kind of work harder type conversation with that kid, you come from a background where you expect that kid is going to be underdeveloped or underperforming because of just their simple age, that you can appreciate that, and it's a different conversation, it's a different approach with that player, as opposed to the traditional kind of everyone should perform the same way, and it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Speed is something else that we've talked a lot about, and I think of the many games that I've lost as a coach where speed has beaten us, which is the ball over the top and then the super fast kid runs through and they probably have 10 chances and score one of them and they win 1-0, but that speed has got him there every single time. But I have a feeling it's a little more important than that, or there's a little more variation of what speed actually is to a player. Yeah,
and I think probably in the ages, those early ages where you're beginning to play 11v11, I think speed really can take over and change games. So maybe that backs the argument that players shouldn't be playing 11v11 at certain ages, because there is such a variance in players who are 6 foot and they've got these long limbs and they're always going to win that ball over the top sprint. And is that taken away from the entire team's development? It probably is, but you've also, it can be faster in smaller spaces, and you can see one player who's great at making those 30-meter sprints to get on the end of a ball, or there's the players who are in the 10x10 space in the field who are just super fast cognitive speed people, who they can just react really quickly to other people's movements or to ball movements or whatever. And I think it goes to your philosophy, is like, what do you want your game to look like, and what is your game model? What's your philosophy? And are you playing direct? Is that an old school way to do it? Is that how you're going to get players to the next level, or is it having players who are really good in tighter spaces or who can think faster? And I think a lot of people just describe speed as that flat out longer sprint, but I see speed, because of how I see the game, is more so being faster thinkers in smaller spaces rather than relying on a ball over the top. I mean, every game will have those long balls over the top where there is those longer distance speeds, and that's what soccer is. You need to have speed in smaller and longer distances. But I think if you're trying to develop it within your train sessions, I think going back to your game model is always a good way to do it. Is if you want to play a certain way and your sessions are based in possession based in smaller, tighter spaces, how do you bring out speed? Make sure the kids or the players are developing their speed within that training session or that exercise is difficult. Because if you're like me, when I coach soccer, it's very games based. I struggle to sectionize where I'll just do a game and then take all the kids away and just have them do pure athletic skills. It's always challenging to try and mix those athletic skills into your game model or whatever exercise you're doing.
So you're an average coach. We've got 1 practice, 2 practices, sometimes 3 or 4 if you're lucky. But how do we now begin to bring in some of this strength training, this speed training? I know from when you've worked with my teams, we've had smaller rondos, for example, is a good start with isolated strength movements and then straight back in. So it's kind of like a flip-flop between the two. That's one way that I really appreciate bringing it in. Are there other ways, or is that the main way that you would bring this into your practices? Do you do it every session? Do you do it once a week? Are the same things that you do? Kind of what's your structure for whether you're advising or whether you're doing this with your own players?
Well, I think going back to what your philosophy in your game model is, I think every session should have all parts of the game. It should have, defending, attacking, transition, and then the physical qualities. You should have accelerations, decelerations. It should have a lot of cognitive speed, like making quick decisions in tighter spaces, and then also longer distance sprints, because we're trying to develop players who can handle all the demands of the game, and the demands of the game are short distance sprints, long distance sprints, a lot of change direction, a lot of cognitive speed. So the easy way to do it, I think, is to isolate it from your training session, or to do it in your warm-up or with your groups. I was doing some sort of technical practice at the start of their session, so players, a lot of the time I think that players think if it's isolated from the training session, it's branded as fitness.
Sure.
So I've always challenged myself, and I'm still working on the best way to do it, but always have the ball with it and some sort of game or some sort of through doing 3v1s and 5v2s as it progressed, but then going, okay, we'll play that for 2 minutes, and then you've got a minute of some sort of strength work or a minute of some sort of speed work, and then go back into your rondos. And it was very quick transitioning between both, and there wasn't a lot of standing around, I don't think, rather than the kind of more simple, easier approach of just lining everyone up and saying, go cone A, cone B, it's a race or whatever. Sure. At least this was soccer, and then you isolate a movement, and there's a little chances as a strength and conditioning coach to coach and talk about the details of decelerating or accelerating or the jumping and or reaction speed. We do a lot of mirror games with your groups, I think, because it was quite timely for them as it was 1v1 mirror games, trying to get separation and trying to really sell the dummy, and how you're using different body shapes to create separation, because that's what the game demands. And even within if you're even playing 11v11, the game will demand that anyway, but we're just doing more of it, I think, in our earlier parts of our training session. And that's how I view it. So I'll do the example with your group was playing 3v1 rondos or 5v2s and going for 2 minutes and making sure it's competitive, making sure there's an outcome, and then going, okay, you got 2 minutes now and working on some deceleration or some jumping and some landing or some strength stuff, or is a different theme based on where they're at in their development and their age. And then towards the end of that kind of warm-up phase, they finish those faster mirror games. Yeah. So they finish that section, and then they're ready to go into probably what I kind of knew that you were going to do, is you go into your bigger, your maybe your small-sided games with your tactical purpose. But they've already got through their different components of the game, and they've worked on developing their strength, they've worked on developing their acceleration and deceleration with the coach there, trying to guide them to do it a little bit better, I think. Because there's one thing just telling them to do it, and there's another thing telling them to do it and then maybe guiding a few of them who are at the lower end just to kind of catch up with the rest of the group, or setting examples for the entire group so they can all just get a little bit better in each session. And it's tough, and again that goes back to subjectivity, is like, are they actually getting better? And I think over time you can see that they do, especially if you're working with ages that you can manipulate, like ages 11 through 13. You can really manipulate how they move with the right coaching, the right cues, and the right amount of stimulus and the right amount of challenge.
I think also when we communicate about that's, I know what you're doing, I stay involved with you, and then my demand of the players involves what they've just worked on too. And I think you kind of mentioned it, where if it's separated as fitness, then they just do it because they need to do it and they don't care and it's done.
Yeah.
Whereas, hey, remember what we just did with Barry? That deceleration? Why are you flying in there? Or have control in this area of the game? And it becomes relatable. And I think I'm very lucky to have had you working with them prior. So I can learn, and we talked earlier about how important it is to have role models and people that you can look up to.
Yeah.
But then also recognizing that I don't know that stuff, or I do, but I don't, and I don't have the experience and the education that you have. So why would I not ask you and work with you in that situation? And I think that's one of my biggest things for all coaches, is realizing that you don't know everything, and you should be asking questions. You should be inviting people to work with you that you respect, but that you can also take something from. So I think about you with the physiology side of for the boys, the strength and speed, and there's so much value for them that I have learned that I see you do it, and I can take it into the rest of our practices.
Yeah, and I think there's also the relationship between, depending on the environment, you've got a lot of support staff, and me being your support staff in that case, I know in theory I should know what you're going to be doing for your sessions, and in theory I should know your philosophy. And say if I know that you're in a phase where you're going to be doing a lot of 2v2, 3v3s, a lot of games that involve separation and kind of physical change of directions anyway, maybe I don't include those mirror games in the warm-up, and maybe there's something that's a bit more important, because I know you're going to do that in your game model. You're going to be doing 2v2, so the boys are going to be really taxed anyway.
Sure. They're
going to be challenged to change direction a lot. So maybe in the warm-up I don't do those really demanding mirror games, but I work on some technical aspect or some stability aspect of actually changing direction. And I think that's really important, because we see a lot, and I'm still guilty of it, is just showing up for a session and just doing what I believe is important for that group right then, and kind of just covering the bases with it. But I sometimes had no idea what the coach is going to do. Maybe the coach should just plan to run them into the ground, or plan to play 3v3s the whole session, and it's really physically demanding, and then you're completely overreaching and doing too much. So I think it's been tough it's tough for people in my position to work with a big variety of teams and a variety of coaches, because everyone sees the game differently. So
sure.
And that means 20 different conversations each day to understand what you're doing that day, or what you're doing that week. So I think there has to be a relationship to understand the coach's philosophy. And I think within youth soccer and soccer in general, I think S&C coaches or fitness coaches, people just assume that they can just work with 20 different teams. And they can cover the bases, and they can get through things that I think are important for that age group, and they're figuring out what's most important for them. But working with that many teams doesn't allow them to understand what the coach is actually going to be doing anyway. So it goes back to the game will always present, your sessions should always present what the game presents, I think. So things we talked about: sprinting short distance, sprinting long distance, decelerating, change of direction, cutting, being deceptive, all those different things that the game brings out anyway. So maybe we don't need to do them in our warm-up, because your session's going to have them anyway.
Touch on timings there too, briefly. We'll do this for 2 minutes, we'll do this for 1 minute. What's your process for using timings like that? Or your thought process, or even just kind of why?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would argue that depending on the age, the level, and if a lot of these current coach licenses, you're being challenged to do assignments on your periodization and your exact time of each exercise.
Yeah.
But as well as I do, as soon as you step on the field and the boys are goofing off, or they love that exercise and they're buzzing about it, we'll do, okay, let's just do one or two more. Let's do a few more minutes of this, because I can see their excitement, and it's for some reason they're all bought in today, whereas yesterday weren't, so I had to cut it short. So I think the human and the coach's view is the most important part, and not being so rigid with 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off. Like, okay, 2 minutes on, okay, they're having a great time, so maybe let's just do an extra rep at the end of this so they can keep getting more out of it because they're engaged right now. Or some of them are goofing off, so I'm just going to cut a little bit short, and so you can get through your practice, your tactical practice. But for me, I'd have kind of an idea of what the exercise that I have planned with the group and what they demand physically, and what the rest ratios are with them. And usually what I've scratched down, I'll be kind of near to near to that.
Sure.
I wouldn't be on my stopwatch. Okay, 2 minutes done. Everyone stop. It's gone 2 minutes 20 seconds, and they're still enjoying what they're doing, and they're still being challenged. It's like that's. I think that's great. I think that's fine. So I don't know if that answers.
It does. It really
question.
does. Yeah. And I think I'm more interested in it because I tend to see where coaches will let it go too long.
Yeah.
And then the intensity tails off, and the enjoyment of it tails off. And then I also believe there's kind of this, and we go back to summer camps where there was a game that everybody loved to play. So you kind of held that as a reward for performance. And I think the same thing, if you can play even with periodization through the licenses now, you talk about a 1v1 can last for 30 seconds to 45 seconds. Whether they're having fun or not, they're probably going to top out by a minute at the latest. It's a long time to play. And I think realizing that for coaches too. So with bigger numbers, more time I think is really valuable, but really understanding that they just can't perform beyond a certain amount of time in a certain exercise. And I think that's where reps are really important. And you mentioned, if they love it, we'll just do one more. We won't necessarily add more and more time or go for another 2 minutes on top of that 2 minutes. We'll take that break and then they can hit it again.
Or, using that to your advantage as a coach and say, did you guys enjoy that? They're like, yeah. Do you want to do one more? It's like, yeah. And then, that's your nugget. That's your ticket to like a bit more buy-in the next time you do that. And I also think within the licenses and a lot of the information you might take online, there's so much information out there, is like how your session should be structured in terms of seconds and minutes and space and all that stuff. It's all great information, but I think it's interpreted to the extent that think about the kids we're working with are robots, and they will perform 100% of their effort in their 1v1, but they won't.
Sure.
And I think we're not dealing with robots. I think that has to be considered as well. But I think you talked about when the quality, the intensity tails off. I think that's really important for coaches to recognize. If you set up your 2v2 games or your 1v1 games, and you're for the first 20 seconds, it's really intense, it's really fast, and it's getting what you want to get out of it. There's a lot of interactions, there's a lot of people taking each other on, and then for some reason after 30 seconds it just looks crap. The movements have gotten slower, people are losing the ball, they're falling over themselves. Like, note that down and say, okay, on that week one we did 20 seconds and it was great, but as soon as I got to 30 seconds it was done. It was, so maybe we can just gradually build up that 30 seconds and not just go from 30 or 40 seconds at the start, because there's no point in doing 20 seconds of fast and then just having them being really fatigued and then their movement quality and their intensity going way down. Because we're trying to develop players who have movement quality and intensity and speed throughout a whole game, rather than just doing it for 20 minutes and then the rest of the game is just labored movements.
Sure.
And that's where periodization comes in, is if you can plan that out in a broader sense of being able to build from your 20 seconds of really quality 1v1s to eventually maybe by the end of the season or maybe the end of their 3-year plan, is then they can do 1v1s for 1 minute and it's still quality.
Yeah.
And they want more, but you're capping it now, because maybe physical qualities are a bit more managed as you get older. So maybe our 11-year-olds, we don't have to be really, really rigid with their times, but we can recognize when they get tired and say, oh, that was 20 seconds.
And just
that was
paying
30
attention
seconds.
as a coach. Not I've just created a plan so we're going to do it, but actually giving yourself feedback and knowing what level your players are at, what you can expect of them.
Yeah. I think, we're always trying to look for quality, and even talking about the 1v1s again, you always want the technical quality, right? You always want them to be able to execute the skill with great quality and great deception if they're doing a move or whatever it is. And as soon as they're training and doing that slower and slower, there's a good chance that they'll do it slower in a game. They're not actually getting better at that. So if you can cap it at where they reach their limit and allow them to rest and recover fully and then go do it again, 2 minutes later, 3 minutes later, and they still do it at quality.
Yeah.
That's a lot more beneficial than having them just do it while they're under complete fatigue and doing it slow and laboured, and then just increase the chance of getting injured, or someone just smacks together because they're tired, or it just looks crap, and then their experience of their 1v1 is not as good as it was when they just did it for quality for 20 seconds and they felt great. That's sometimes how I see it, and it's tough to build it into your year-long periodization model, or if you're working with teams for 2 years, your 2-year plan or your 5-year plan, or if you're a DOC and you're supposed to be working with coaches on their longer term plan. Like, how do you mix all this stuff in? It's really, really difficult. It's really hard, but I think just recognizing when the quality of whatever exercise you're doing goes down, is maybe that's a good time to call it and then build from there.
And even, I think, just to finish on that, really looking at what a 1v1 looks like in a game, it's a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
Right? You've received the ball, you maybe look up, pressure comes, and this is often the variation of 1v1, the pressure comes from behind, or the pressure comes from the front, or if you take a second, then a second player comes in and replicating those moments. So you don't need a minute. You really don't.
Yeah.
Because you get through a 1v1 and maybe another 1v1 in a game, and then the ball's gone. And then, it may come back to you in 20 seconds. And that's where I think timing can be really valuable, because the demand on the player is realistic.
Yeah. But then also being able to gradually overload them gradually over time, is that when you're driving your physical quality. So when it does happen that little Jimmy has, for some reason, he's got 4 1v1s in a row in a game and he does them all with,
can do
like, that's from doing it for 20 seconds in a training session. So it's gradually overload them, but definitely gradually, not just from the start doing 1 minute of 1v1s, because that's what it said in your coaching license, or that's what Google told you.
We're coming into summer. I had a conversation with a parent the other day, and the question was, we don't have practice, so what can the player be doing? Should they, what kind of sprint should they be doing? How long should they be running for? Can they do push-ups? Is that going to help them?
Yeah.
Help me out. Get me through this myth of these players needing to do all of this physical activity to remain prepared for the soccer season.
Yeah.
Have we got it backwards there?
Well, I think it depends on their age, and you have to consider. The kid's age, what they're going through physically. Are they going through a growth spurt? Maybe it's time to actually deload their training a little bit and maybe focus on strength training, so when they go through their big growth spurt in the fall, they can actually handle the demands of the game and don't have to sit out for 6 weeks. And that foresight is tough to see sometimes, I think, because kids just want to be kids. But I think when you're talking to parents as a coach, is encourage them to go that multi-sports approach. I think is really important in the summer, and I think to find out about programs that they'll really enjoy, and whether it's intense soccer training, maybe the kid can handle and enjoy that. You always have to be, as a parent and as a coach, to be able to assess if the kid is really enjoying it. And I think summer months, I've got loads of emails already this week. I was like, can you guide us on what we should do for our summer? And I could send you some soccer specific program for 6 weeks, and you're on strength training 3 days a week, and you're doing these box to box runs with a ball or without a ball 3 days a week. It's like, I don't know if you're going to enjoy that.
Yeah.
But maybe you're really intense about your soccer, and that's how you hold your beliefs. Like that's what I need to be doing to be good at soccer and to be really successful next season. Maybe it's right for you, but for the most part, it's not, I don't think. So I think variety and cross training and summer camps, whether intense soccer summer camps or casual ones or whatever, I think are always a good way. But I think when you're getting to your older, more performance ages, and still considering how maybe intense the player themselves is about their training and their game, maybe then you can start to prescribe, as a fitness coach or coach, specific running amounts or specific training amounts. But and I think it's tough as well as in the States. Is not a lot of team play through the summer months, and I think I think you're the same as your view on the game. It should be developing your soccer should be through games based, should be replicating the game as much as possible, and that's tough for kids during the summer. And they think that, as well, culturally, they think the summer is the time to go running on the field and going to the gym, or to go just to work tirelessly on my fitness, and then come in fatigued in the fall, and then you're at the bottom of the group because you're so tired, and your experience of the game goes down, and you're like, I'm thinking about quitting. And I don't know. I see that a lot with kids. So it's tough to answer those questions. I try to guide parents away from the X's and O's of distances and that amount, because of how I believe soccer is. But I think other fitness coaches, I was just reading an article last night. It was, I think, a coach from RSL, really well-known strength and conditioning coach. He was sharing what he does with his academy, U16, U17 academy players through the summer. And it's really detailed, it's really specific, it's gym and field-based and a lot of running. And people might take that and say, I saw this guy doing this with the RSL academy. Do you think my 14-year-old recreational player will work? I was like, no.
Sure, yeah.
You've got to think about context, and that article was shared for top-level academy players, and it was really, really good information. It doesn't apply to everyone.
It's not relevant, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then what about even with coaches thinking about needing to stay in contact with their team, or I guess that's generally a fear, kind of it's summer, so I don't see my team, we don't train. Like here in San Francisco, we don't have access to fields.
Yeah.
So your team is effectively off for the summer. And I think about, we're very fortunate to have the beach, so I set up today beach soccer.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Come on out, 5 o'clock, I'll see you there.
Yeah.
And facilitating, and I have no plans on coaching. I have every plan on playing with them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
losers go in the ocean. And I just think if you can really, if you want your players to continue playing, or people continue to ask, set something up for them.
Yeah.
We will be at, and it's not like you and I where it was organic and you just show up and everybody will be there.
Yeah.
It's, I may need to use Team Snap, and I may have to say at 5 o'clock I'm going to be at this field, or we will be at this field. See you there if you can make it.
Yeah, I think we need to adapt as coaches. We have to. We're used to this scheduling, this over scheduling of kids and parents, and they rely on these team snaps and scheduling. I think we just got to probably accept that as how it is, and use that maybe to our advantage, and actually put things on the schedule and the calendar. And I think that's cross training. Going to play beach soccer because it's a different sport, and I know that because I've been working with the US soccer with the beach national team for the last few months, and they just qualified for the World Cup, and seeing that as it's a completely different sport, and it challenges the body in different ways. There's less impact on the joints. It's great. It challenges the kids to be acrobatic and creative, and it just challenges them a lot differently, and still developing soccer, but it's challenged their bodies differently, I think. So I think that's great. I think more coaches could even make that as part of their their summer program. Is like we play beach soccer once every 2 weeks, or we're going to play this beach soccer tournament that's in Ocean Beach in July or whatever. I think that's just one route. Or instead of beach, you just gather at the local basketball. You could rent a hall for $50, and you bring your team and you play basketball. And I don't know. Maybe that's something the kids can then drive themselves after 1 or 2 sessions of you being there, and
take it on.
Take it on yourself, and then it's kid driven, and it's away from Coach Lee judging us if my basketball skills are good or not. Like, no, you guys go do it. Like I'll book the hall for you. There's no issues there. But I think the cross training in the summer is great, but also making sure whatever they're doing is enjoyable.
So let's wrap this up. And what are we saying to the coach that's listening to this, that's perhaps interested in this, or has no idea, and hopefully we're changing their impression or their history of the way they were taught, so they teach the same way?
Well, I think first of all, you have to think bigger picture than just your 3-month season, or your 6-month plan, or your year with this team. You got to think bigger than that. You got to think what you're exposing the kids to right now, and how that will influence their ability as soccer players and as athletes in 3 or 4 years' time, when they got to compete, perform. I think that's the number one thing. I think coaches forget that. They go straight to, okay, we're going to do 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, and we're going to get them really fit and fast right now. But it doesn't work like that. The progression, as much as any soccer coach knows, is technical progression, tactical progression, physical progression. All takes a long time. So I think that's number one, is definitely thinking bigger picture. And I think number two, I think going back to your game model and how you see the game and what you think is important for these kids over their period that they're with you, your 2 years or 3 years that they're with you, how can you include different identifiable exercise within your session that will encourage attributes, whether physical or otherwise, within your warm-ups or your earlier parts of your session, or in your extracurricular activities. How can you encourage? I work with a coach here in the city who's I think is the best, and every one of his start of his sessions will incorporate some sort of physical challenge, but that influences his game model. And then deception is a big phrase he'll use a lot, but he'll play his little warm-up games, and he'll have his technical challenges and his all opposed play, but then he'll break it down for a quick little stretch, and then have some sort of challenge that be able to bring into his game model. And deception is a word that he'd use, and he'd do those mirror games, and he'd do little reaction games, and I think you can include that in your training sessions without having to really isolate it from the game. Having kids lined up doing push-ups, sit-ups, and shuttle runs you can do within your session of your structure of your session, and so the kids still see it as soccer, right? They don't see it as a separate entity altogether. But then the flip side, you've also got to bear in mind that a lot of people culturally think that fitness training has to be done in isolation to improve your ability as a soccer player. I think we have a chance and a challenge as coaches to break that culture a little bit and show that we can get players really, really fit and fast for our game model within our training sessions without having to isolate it.
I think that's one of my biggest takeaways is considering using this downtime to put your team together in something else. Go and play in a basketball league. I think that's a brilliant idea that is... I don't know anything about basketball.
Yeah.
So what a great thing for me to learn too, because people always talk about the crossover between the sports, like the movements and some of the things you just mentioned there. So embracing other sports, and there's a lot of pushback from soccer coaches, and maybe because they get a lot of pushback from traditional sports too. Soccer's always kind of been the black sheep, and now I think there's kind of the pushback back against those sports where kid says I'm going to play baseball and the soccer coach is like, what do you play that for?
But basketball's great because it teaches you how to protect the ball and use your body, right? Keep the ball away from the defender. And you think if you actually look at a game, you probably, if you spent enough time in a team, you'd figure out who was playing basketball because of how they maneuver their body to turn their back to a defender and make sure the ball is away from the defender, rather than some kids who just kind of expose the ball really easily and they haven't figured out how to use their body to protect the ball just yet.
I really appreciate your time, Barry. This is brilliant. Thank you so much.
It was great. It was good fun.
So there it is, a alternative view or a corresponding view with what you're doing on the field, what you really can also be considering from just having an open mindset to your players being engaged in other sports or in other activities, to just simply understanding where they're at physically, and then understanding what the workload or the demand that you can have of your players based on who they are and what they're doing. Simple things like understanding if they have been to track the 2 hours before your practice, that they're not going to work as hard, but they're still there. So how can you adapt and change your practice to still involve them? Yeah, you can't have them running around and chasing the ball if, for example, they're a central midfielder, but you can have start points in a practice where that player will begin with the ball and move the ball on. And you'll find the best coaches out there are the ones that have this open mind and they engage that your players are active in other sports. And as Barry said, you can begin to identify those players who have certain qualities. They can move in different ways. They have this ability such as hand-eye coordination. And that translates into how they move, how they read a ball, how they read the flight of the ball, how they open up. And so many more qualities come from these individuals, and especially with the younger ages, that have this open mindset, an open environment where they can go and play other sports. And as I wrapped up there with Barry talking about summer, encourage your kids to go and be kids. Go and play other sports, go and experience new things, go and meet new people, go and live your life and come back to my environment fully refreshed and fully ready to engage, because I have supported and I've pushed you, because I hear so many players that are committed to their team, and as I said, it feels like they have to be because that seems to be the right answer, but it's really not. I'm working with, in my environment, 11, 12, 13, sometimes 14-year-old boys. These have by no means figured out their pathway in life. And part of my role as a coach is to also open their eyes and develop these people. We talk about the physical maturation. We talk about them as individuals and how they're all completely different. Well, they're all playing the same sport, but they are completely different, and they have other passions and they have other engagements. Engage with that. Interact with your players, become familiar with what they love to do. And if anything, it helps set you with expectations of what that player is really going to offer to your team or to you as a coach, because they may be engaged in other things 3, 4, 5 days a week. And that may not just cut it with the expectation for the team, and that's a conversation that you need to have. Maybe you're coaching the development academy or a higher level of play, and you have this expectation. Well, when you understand what that player is into, then you begin to assess what that environment looks like for that player and if it's going to work for them. And if you're in a good club or a good environment, then there will always be an alternative option for them to play. Conversation with Barry has really helped me to put a finger on the pulse of what I thought I could already feel in terms of who my players are, what they're doing, what they're expecting from me, and little things about their maturity and their development. And of course, having him work with my players and seeing him in action has made a huge difference. But I really hope it helps you too. I'd love to hear from you. As I said in the commercial, I'd love to hear from you via a voice message. Just send me a note and let me know if this is helpful, if there are other things that you think that we could get from Barry too, because he is a friend of mine. He works with me. He is not far away, and I would be happy to interview him again and pull up more information and maybe go deeper on things like peak high velocity and the maturation rate. So if you have any feedback, definitely let me know. You can always find me at Lee Dunn Soccer on Twitter. Another thank you again to Tactical Pad for their support and for access to their software. Remember, you get 10% off from leedunsoccer.com. So jump over there, join the band. It's a brilliant tool and I use it all the time. And it's serious, check out my Instagram at Lee Dunn Soccer and it's on there. Use it all the time. There is more always coming from Heads and Volleys, and you will hear from us very soon.